Hello LEGO fans, welcome back to LEGO 48. When I first got started in GBC, one of the first things that I tried to build, because I thought it would be easy, was a stepper module. The concept is straightforward. You have a rotating crankshaft with steps on top of the cranks that progressively increase in height. What I didn't realize at the time was that the sides of LEGO bricks, when they are stuck to other bricks, do not go straight up and down. Instead, when a brick is stuck onto another brick, the sides flare out just a little bit, making the bottom of each brick slightly wider than the top. You can experience this for yourself by taking a bunch of bricks stuck together and running your fingernail up and down the side. On the way down, your fingernail goes smoothly, but on the way up, it will get caught on the edge of each brick. Since I could never get stacks of bricks to run smoothly past each other, I eventually just gave up on the idea. Recently, however, I came across this stepper design by Sam Friesen. I've heard of Sam before, and he's got a really good reputation in the GBC world, and this stepper design was really intriguing. The steps that go up and down have absolutely zero contact with the neighboring steps, and they're guided using connectors running over these vertical axles, so there are no seams for anything to get caught on. This looks like a great way to implement a stepper, so I downloaded his design file and took a look at it in Studio. In reviewing the design, the first thing that I noticed was that the motor is completely buried inside the module. If it dies, you're not replacing it without some major disassembly and rebuilding. So my first design change is going to be opening up this left side so the motor can be easily pulled out and replaced if needed. Next, looking at the drivetrain, I realized that the first gear connected to the motor is this 36-tooth gear, which is driving a 12-tooth gear, leading to a screw gear connected to another 12-tooth gear. This means that we've actually got a 1-to-3 gear ratio that's increasing the drive speed by a factor of 3, before the screw drive that yields a 1-to-12 decrease in speed. Overall, the total ratio is a 4-to-1 reduction from the motor to the crankshaft. Given that the nominal speed for an M motor is above 400 RPM, that means that the stepper is going to cycle at 100 plus RPM, which seems a little fast. Also, with the 1-to-3 increase, that means the axle with the screw on it is going to be rotating at over 1200 RPM. My general design rule for drivetrains is to always have the biggest reduction first, so you immediately decrease the speed at which axles rotate and reduce the wear and tear on those axles. My first attempt at reducing the speed of the screw axle was to replace the 36-tooth gear and 12-tooth gear combination with a 28-tooth gear and 20-tooth gear combination. This covers the same horizontal distance, but only increases the speed by a factor of 1.4. With a standard LEGO M motor, the resulting cycle rate will only be around 50 RPM, but I'm planning on using a slightly faster Mold King motor. According to my earlier testing, these should run around 500 RPM, and I should get a cycle time around 66 cycles per minute. I had to make some significant changes to the right side of the module to get the gears to fit, but I got it to work. While I was making design changes, I had some concerns about the output ramp, which I really felt could be built a little more solidly. I added a longer inverted slope to better support the outfeed, and I added a pair of 2x2 corner plates to provide extra support for these guide slopes at the top. As I was putting everything together, I discovered that the pistons for the steps are free to slide back and forth along the crankshaft axle, which can be a bit awkward to work with. So I decided to add some spacers to the axle, like there are in the Brickworld 2018 ball pump. One of the gaps is 2 studs, so that's easy, just add a pin connector. The other gap is 3.5 studs, so I used a 1L lift arm, followed by a half bushing, and then a pin connector. I think adding these make the crankshaft and pistons more stable and easier to work with. After getting everything together, I ran it, but I was surprised to only get 51 cycles per minute, significantly slower than the 66 CPM that I was expecting. I pulled the motor and threw it on my motor speed tester and clocked it at 32 seconds, which translates to a no-load speed of 468 RPM. Great. Brand new Mold King motors are not as consistent as I had hoped. But, knowing the starting speed, let's look at that 51 CPM and compare that to the expected CPM. There's only one cycle per rotation of the main crankshaft, so RPM and CPM are going to be equal to each other. To calculate the expected CPM, we divide the no-load RPM by the drivetrain gear ratio. That ratio is calculated by taking 28 divided by 20, and then dividing that by 12. I calculate the efficiency of the drivetrain by dividing the measured CPM by the expected RPM. 51 divided by 54.6 equals 93%, or a loss of about 7%. I'm pretty sure this is because of the gearing from the 28-tooth gear to the 20-tooth gear, which increases speed but decreases torque, and that increases the back pressure from the screw drive and the steps. It's for this reason that I try to never gear up, and if I have multiple gear reductions, I try to have the largest gear reduction first. The brick-rolled ball pump, which has a similar piston mechanism, has a single 5-to-1 gear reduction between the motor and the lifting piston. If I throw the same motor into one of these ball pumps, I can measure the piston at 91 cycles per minute. Comparing that to the expected rate of 93.6 means that the ball pump has an efficiency of 97%. So where do I go from here? I'd like to replace the gear train in the stepper with the simplified 5-to-1 gear train from the ball pump. However, at 5-to-1, the stepper would run at around 90 plus cycles per minute, which I think would be a bit fast for this module. This plot of RPM versus gear ratio shows the resulting speeds for this motor. A 6-to-1 ratio would give me 78 cycles per minute. 7-to-1 would give me around 67, which would be even better. Unfortunately, any gear ratio above 5-to-1 requires a 2-stage gear train, which means the drivetrain gets 2 studs longer, as shown here. To make room for the gear train underneath, I can redesign the in-basket to be 8x10 rather than 8x8. The 8L side axles can be replaced with 10L axles, and this 8x2 plate underneath can be replaced with an 8x4 plate, extending the base as well. The gear train consists of an 8-tooth gear to a 24-tooth gear in the first stage, and a 12-tooth gear to a 28-tooth gear in the second stage. With no screw gear, the motor is now oriented lengthwise, and I'm able to implement the motor connection as an easy attach, easy pull style. After building this and running it, I clock the speed at 67 cycles per minute, almost exactly the same as the expected speed. That means I've essentially eliminated all of the extra drag from the original design. With a 7-to-1 gear ratio, the steps are operating at a more reasonable speed, and there's almost twice as much torque being applied to the main axle. This looks like it's running well, and I'm really happy with it. One thing I noticed is that the side rails aren't really high enough to be effective, so I added a second rail on each side, which helps a lot. While I'm happy with what I've done, these improvements came at a cost. This design is more complex, it uses more parts, and the overall length of the module has increased by 2 studs. For my purposes, that's not a big deal. I'm willing to trade that for easier maintenance and less wear and tear. But, in fairness to Sam Friesen, I feel like the original concept was for a workshop-type design, something that was meant to be simple and as compact as possible. And from that perspective, I have to admit that Sam's design is pretty well done. In my opinion, the goal of a workshop module is to give new builders a low-cost way to build a module, while showing those builders how a certain mechanism works. Sam's design is a great introduction to stepper modules, and I'm thrilled to have a new module in my collection.
You know, I had already finished this video and was just waiting for the instructions to get approved on Rebrickable when I thought of one more change that I should make to this design, which means Mod A lasted for less than 12 hours. One important advantage of the removable motor on the Mod G ball pump is that when you pull the motor, you can rotate the gear in the front by hand, which can be really useful for testing the module and making sure that everything is moving smoothly. Unfortunately, you can't really do that with the stepper, since the gear train is largely inside. However, there is this axle coming out of the front of the module, and it's connected directly to the main crankshaft. This design requires 1.5 studs inside this Technic brick, and the brick adds one more stud. And then, on the 3L axle, there's one more half stud remaining outside. I took care of that in Mod A by adding this half beam as a spacer. If I replace the 3L axle with a 4L axle, then I'll have 1.5 studs of axle on the outside. So for Mod B, I'm adding a 40-tooth gear and a 12-tooth bevel gear. The 40-tooth gear gives me something to grip so that I can rotate the crankshaft by hand. The 12-tooth bevel gear just takes up the last half stud on the axle and looks cooler than using a half bushing. This is a simple change, but it's a really useful one, allowing you to manually check the operation of this module anytime the motor is disconnected. Enjoy!